The Big Life, presented by Bloomberg Quint.
Hi, I'm Menaka Doshi. Welcome to this brand new Bloomberg Quint podcast on leadership. I'm starting this podcast with a confession. It lies in the cross-section of professional and personal, because the question, what is true leadership, has occupied me for a long time now, whether it's when I'm interviewing business heads or working in the newsroom. I know the word leadership suggests a large team being steered by someone at the head of it all. That's one way, and a rather conventional way of looking at it. Some might even call that management. The other way of looking at it is leadership of yourself, your life. To me, this has always been the tougher puzzle to crack and the more interesting one, because it involves answering questions about yourself. Questions such as, can you acknowledge your own weaknesses? Are you always playing it safe, or do you have the courage to take risks? Is it your failure or somebody else's success that makes you insecure? Are you a good collaborator, a good team player? So this podcast is going to be about finding out how to live the big life, one of leadership of self, and of course, if you run large teams or an organization, then leadership of others. Now imagine my luck that around the same time that I was mulling over this project, Saurabh Mukherjee and Anupam Gupta released their book, The Victory Project, 6 Steps to Peak Potential. Saurabh is a leading fund manager, as you might know already, and a very successful author. Anupam is an investment research consultant and runs one of India's best-known podcasts, Paisa Vaisa. And the book is a guide to surviving and thriving in hyper-competitive, cutthroat, professional and social domains. So in the book, the two authors study the lives and best habits of leaders to understand what works and what doesn't. Let me invite both the authors to this podcast. Saurabh, Anupam, congratulations on the book and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Menka. Really happy to be here.
Thank you, Menka. Thank you for inviting us to the podcast.
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Let me start by asking you the very first question. What made you two collaborate to write this book?
So a couple of years ago, Anupam and I were sitting in Lower Parel in a cafe having a nice cup of coffee. And we were discussing how the common traits that the great promoters and capital allocators in corporate India share with each other. And then the conversation meandered onto how successful fund managers are actually very similar to successful promoters. And that led Anupam to pose the question, are there common traits for outsized success across diverse disciplines, across business, say arts, academia, sports, and could we possibly dig into those common drivers of outside success? That was the origins of this book 2 years back in a cafe in Lower Parel.
And your book starts, interestingly, with 2 fictitious people, Akanksha and Suraj. And you write about how they are happy, but they're not quite happy. They're successful, but they're not completely fulfilled. Anupam, who are Akanksha and Suraj and why are they not happy? And what is the message you're trying to convey through them?
Okay, Akanksha and Suraj I would say that they're based probably in bits and pieces from our own lives as well as people that we know. Akanksha, for example, is someone who is a senior executive at an FMCG firm, probably at the number 2 position within her product, has a family, have probably ticked all the the check boxes for what you want to achieve, very successful, and yet not really able to crack through certain blocks. For example, the product that she is in charge of is facing serious competition from a newcomer who's offering higher commission. So how do you crack that? Her family, for example, she's missing her kids' birthdays and stuff like that. So that's Akanksha. Suraj is this very typical 25-year-old, with a lot of enthusiasm, an IITIM guy who's come to Bombay to fulfill his dreams, and boom, that whole thing about staying, say, in a far-flung suburb and doing a 10-20 kilometer commute every day in Bombay. Now, of course, things are different. Mm-hmm. But having to navigate that, aaj bridge toot gaya, kal kuch ho gaya, traffic is there, floods are there. And this layer of technology where you've got your mobile has WhatsApp, it has Slack, it has email, it has TV, it has a ticker, and you've got your full-time job. So just managing through all that, how do you go through? So those are the two. The message that we're sending, it is possible. If we present to you this framework, and if you follow it, you can actually achieve success in your personal life and success in your professional life. Yeah.
All through the book, and this is what struck me as a working professional, is that you're making the point that, before the pandemic of COVID-19, the pandemic of the cluttered mind is the one that we've actually not fully recognized. Both the impact, the implications, the outcomes, and maybe the way to manage this. The best leaders that you and Saurabh write about, talk about, they seem to have overcome this issue of a cluttered mind. What did you notice in the way they managed this that helped them successfully overcome it? Because that seems to lie at the core of your book, the cluttered mind, and in response to that, simplicity.
So I think they exemplify the simplicity paradigm, and I'll just walk you through that in really, really quickly. One is that when they gave us time, they gave us somewhere between 2 to 3 hours of their time. When we went to meet Mohandas, for example, the kind of conversation that we had out there was just so focused. These people have very, very clear ways of thinking. There is just no clutter in their mind, and therefore there's no clutter when they talk. So 3 things I can think of. One is they don't have any mobile or any app or anything on when they're talking to us. 2, they're extremely well read. I mean, we've been to people's houses where they've got floor to ceiling stacks of books, just books and books at 10. They're great readers. And I think 3rd is the routine aspect of it. The fact that they wake up, they know exactly what they're going to do. They follow that routine through the entire time. We've tried to bring those qualities in the book as well. So I think the best leaders, this is how they overcome the problem of clutter.
You, in your book, both you and Saurabh have explored the simplicity paradigm in various different ways, using different leadership approaches to it. So I'm going to use this cue to ask Saurabh to try and explain the simplicity paradigm at this point in time. And then, of course, we will talk about it in more detail over the course of the next few episodes. But what is the simplicity paradigm, Saurabh?
I think all of us at varying stages of our lives have read various books about how to be more successful. So there are books about waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning. There are other books about the secrets of success and so on. So for better or for worse, Anupam and I are on the sort of that side of 40, where we've read many of these books. So when we were going through this journey, we asked ourselves, there must be a way to sequence this literature. There's a wealth of knowledge out there, both in terms of books, podcasts, interviewing other successful people. There must be a way to sequence these various steps that lead to outsized success. And that's how actually the triangular sort of pyramid-shaped simplicity paradigm came about. And we sort of layered it in 2 layers, the sort of foundational layer, the basics of what you need for a successful professional life, which is specialize, find your specialty, find your vocation, find your passion. Simplify that, create simple rules for outside success in your area of specialty, layer a degree of spirituality, right? And we'll discuss this later on, but the ability to sort of think less about yourself and think more about a collaborative group, about the society, the country you live in, is also central to success. So that's the foundational layer of simplicity paradigm. Specialize, spiritualize, and simplify. And then you go on to the more advanced level skills, which is reduce clutter, juice up creativity, and collaborate. Collaborate with a diverse group of people so that the whole becomes greater than the sum of the parts. Perhaps the sort of least emphasized aspect of success in a comparative free market economy is this aspect, that you have to collaborate and you have to sort of subsume yourself in a larger whole. That could be your housing society, it could be the state or the country you live in, but the collaboration aspect is the kind of icing on the cake. And thus you have the foundational layer of the simplicity paradigm, which is specialize, simplify, and spiritualize. And then the more advanced layer, clutter reduction, creativity, and collaboration. And then we end the book with case studies, which exemplify the paradigm.
Are most leaders that you meet who are successful at having achieved these various levels of the simplicity paradigm, are they born to it? Do they cultivate it over a period of time? Is it cultivatable?
So ironically, the answer to that question, Melka, came from Leo Tolstoy. So Tolstoy has this famous sort of, two sentences with which Anna Karenina begins, right? And he says that all happy families tend to be very similar to each other. Each unhappy family is dissimilar in its own way. Each has a different reason for unhappiness. And I think it's somewhat similar with successful people. If you see the lives of most people who are achieving outsized success anywhere in the world, at its core, they're not wasting their time. They're using every minute of the day in a productive way. But there are also other common aspects to it, such as creating a routine which they can stick to, reading voraciously, having a support network around them of friends and family. And that's what led us to believe that whether you look at fund managers, great business leaders, successful sports people, people in the creative arts, there are actually several common threads which bind their success in a common framework. And the Simplicity Paradigm and the Victory Project is our attempt to sort of create a cohesive framework that people in our country can use to guide their lives.
Okay, so that's encouraging. It is achievable. I'm going to ask you one last question just to be able to establish the premise of this book. In the opening of the book itself, you speak to well-known business leader Mohandas Pai, and he sort of recounts what growing up was like for his generation. He equates a simple life with a happy life. But maybe for Mr. Pai's generation, a simple life was the only option. The question I ask myself, and I know the question that so many people I work with ask themselves today is, do we really want simple lives anymore? Is that a choice that's available at all?
So let me just rephrase the question in a slightly different way. Do we want lives with outsized success? Do we want lives where we are using our creativity, our ability to work collaboratively to achieve outsized success? Do we want lives where we are doing justice to our personal lives, yet being successful professionally? I suspect the answer to most of those questions for most of us will be yes, we do want those things. Now, if we want those things in a competitive free market, we obviously have to think smart about these things. Society and the free market is not going to serve it to us in a dish. And therefore, what is the way to think smart about it? That's where the simplicity paradigm comes about. We're not pretending that simple is easy. Right? This is not easy to do. But at the same time, if 20 years ago, somebody had given the young Anupam or the young Saurabh this book, I think would have stood us in great stead through our careers in Mumbai's financial markets.
Well, on that note, let me tell you that Mohandas Pai is joining this podcast to discuss the cost of economic progress. Welcome to you, Mr. Pai. And with that, Anupam, it's over to you.
Great. Thanks, Menka. Thank you so much. So we'll start this part of the podcast with the title, The Growth Dilemma, with just a very quick introduction to all of you for what we're going to talk about. India's GDP has tripled in the past 20 years, and on a per capita basis, we've gone up to around US dollars 2,000 from around 600. So we've grown faster than any democracy has ever grown in the history of this planet. In fact, India has grown faster over the past 20 years than any large country has ever grown, with the sole exception of China. And yet, all of this prosperity hasn't produced happiness or success. The banking system is in tatters. Mutual funds run by respectable fund houses struggle to give returns over long time periods. All of this financial stress obviously leads to emotional stress. Job security is a source of mental stress for a big part of the workforce. Nearly half the marriages in our large cities are breaking down. No surprise, many people cannot figure out how to strike a work-life balance. So to discuss this and how India's economic progress isn't leading to more satisfying lives, I have with me Mohandas Pai, Padma Shri awardee and current chairman of Manipal Global Education. He was the former director of Infosys. Nisha Hola, technology fellow at CCAMP, that's the Center for Cellular and Molecular Platforms. So let's start with you. I recall when I and Saurabh had come down to Bangalore, we met you for the book and you told us about how things were when you were growing. So let's take that as a starting point to show how things have changed. Let's start with this.
Well, when I was growing up in the 80s and 80s, before liberalization, we were part of a failed country. I remember graduating in 1979 with a BCom degree, then going on to do my CA. I finished in 1982 with a law degree and a CA degree. I did very well, but there were no options for us. Life was very simple. Nothing moved at all. Growth rates were very down. Government was dominant. Private sector was extremely small. And we were sort of satisfied because we didn't have any aspirations. We didn't have a TV showing us the outside world. Yes, we had Doordarshan. We couldn't see anything more than that. And the information we got in newspapers was fine. We read the Hindu newspaper, which was very nice those days. So our aspiration was down. What we had outside was down. And pleasure for us is going to a Chinese restaurant and having a nice lunch, or watching a movie for 10 rupees, etc., or going for a long walk. It's very simple. And India was not growing. And then India started growing from 91. We didn't see it in the first few years. Then came companies like Infosys, and we got into this high growth model. So the India that is growing up is very different from the India we live today. Has it become better? Yes. Has it become worse? Yes. Has it become more stressful? Yes. Has there grown in opportunities? Yes. So it is a bundle of many, many things that have happened from the India I knew.
It's very interesting to hear MVP's perspective, because I was part of the generation that grew up after the economic liberalization. And there was a sense of, success in the air, because everyone was seeing India's economy shoot up. I think around 1991 economic liberalization, India was hardly $275 billion in GDP. But today we are at nearly 3 trillion, pre-COVID, of course. And so growing up, that it was palpable, that sense of achievement was close at hand. Technology was coming in. And so we could see all these new growth paradigms that weren't there before. What we were learning in school about 40 or so years of socialist development was not what we were seeing outside in the economy, when we looked outside of our textbooks. And so there was a very different atmosphere growing up. And for those of us who got involved with technology, I'm a technology fellow at CCamp. I'm a chemical engineer and a computational physicist by training. And so there was a sense that working in technology and using technology to change the existing paradigm could give rise to asymmetric effects. And that is what we're seeing in the Indian economy today. We've seen technologies like India Stack having changed lives, having changed the way development is going on in the country. We've seen so many sectors being impacted by technology. Financial technology, obviously, we're seeing agri-tech being disrupted. We're seeing more investment go into research and development, though the economy needs a lot more, and we can talk about that in further questions. But growing up, definitely there was a sense that something is changing and that there are all these new ways to get involved with the economy. And I think that is one of the biggest things I can recall now growing up.
Sure. Saurabh, you've got this unique perspective, right? Because you went overseas and then came back. What do you see this?
So look, I mean, we came back to, so ironically, my parents migrated from India exactly because of the world MDP described. So my dad was literally a rocket scientist from IIT, and he simply couldn't earn a living in the 80s that could help us make ends meet. So as luck would have it, we migrated from India 2 months before the 91 liberalization. And then by the time my wife and I migrated back to India in 2008, it was a transformed country, as Nisha just described. But what we saw and what we see now that we are back, right, and we've been spent very happy years in Mumbai, we see a country in flux. We see a country in ferment, right? This is the fifth of humanity lives here. And this is the playground of sort of all the greatest ideas in the world today. But whether it's should technology drive progress, or should the government drive progress? Should the free market drive progress, or should we have the helping hand of the state, right? And it's that flux which makes it both a very exciting and productive place to work, but also, Anupam, it's the same flux which leads to this angst, which leads to the frisson, the tension that ripples through the victory project, right? And I think I see this as two sides of the same coin.
How did, say, someone like a China or other countries, how did they go to scale, to size, and accommodate so much of ambitions from all the people? And where exactly did we probably go wrong?
Well, I think what China did and what the US did when it was growing up was to focus on improved governance and urbanization. Why improved governance? How do you improve the quality of life? To improve the quality of life for everybody, you must give them the necessities of life. What are the necessities of life? To make sure there's enough food grown, there's enough food on the table, to make sure that everybody can aspire to own a house, to make sure there's water in the tap, power in the switch, a toilet in the house, and then maybe a telephone or connectivity and education for your children, the basic necessities. And China did that in a very substantial way to improve human capital, because for human beings to be productive, your necessities should be available to you without struggling for that. For example, mobility in cities today. Look at Mumbai. I mean, only now Mumbai is building an underground, is building the metro, etc. What did Mumbai do for the last 50 years? They still had the old train transport system. People struggled. People spent 4 hours, 5 hours going to and fro. What a waste of time. Look at Bangalore. Bangalore has grown so well. 20 lakh techies are there in Bangalore. It's got the largest software service industry for many cities in the world. But then what do we have? A broken down infrastructure. Why is that? City governance is extremely poor. We have not devolved power to the city for the states, because the political class had this romantic notion going back to independence that India is a rural country. India is a country that lives from villages. Nobody wants to really to live in villages. Ambedkar told his people, get away from the villages, go to the cities, because urbanization creates specialization. Specialization improves productivity, and improved productivity leads to improved wages. So we need concentration of human activity, and that they've forgotten. That requires good governance. That required urbanization. And that's what China did. China is today 59% urban. The world is 52% urban. India is reportedly 34%, maybe 40%. And we still revel in the idea of an ideal village, though nobody wants to go live in a village. So I think we made mistakes along the way. And that mistake is paying us badly. And now we are catching up on that. We are developing infrastructure in the cities. We are developing more urban towns. We are making sure more jobs are available, because the land cannot support people. 43% of population depend on agriculture, which is just 15% of GDP, growing 3%. Is unsustainable. So I think we made these two big mistakes, and we are paying for that. Now we are remedying it. We're still 10, 15 years behind. Because remember, there are only two things that can propel an economy: productivity of human capital, productivity of financial capital. Financial capital, we can be productive, but human capital, to be productive, we must empower people and give them the necessities of life, so that they are fully empowered, they can concentrate on their work and activity.
What did China do, right? In 1978, if you look at the GDP of India and GDP of China, they were both $150 billion. But then they liberalized, and they embarked on a very sequential strategy. They first liberalized the agriculture sector, which we are doing only today. So we're already 30, 40 years behind. And so farmers could start growing crops of their choice. They abolished all the restrictions on where to sell, how to use farmland, etc. And so farmers' income doubled, tripled, like they had not seen before. And it created enormous surpluses, which then went into rural growth, right? Now, those surpluses were then taken into building these coastal special economic zones. And that is where China's growth really took off, because entire coastal provinces were converted into special economic zones. They were granted flexibility for foreign currency conversions, flexibility for free market operations, much unlike the mainland China. And so these provinces were decentralized, they were empowered, and they drove the growth of the country, which was then brought into labor-intensive industries in the rest of the mainland. So China had a large population. Agriculture could not sustain it, much as MDP was talking about how India is, right? 43% of the population is dependent on a sector that is only contributing 16 to 17% of the GDP. China realized early on that that is not a sustainable dynamic. And so they put all their money into labor-intensive industries. They became the manufacturing hub of the world, and they're still the manufacturing hub of the world. But then after that, what did they do? They didn't stagnate at labor-intensive industries. They started taking that money, putting it into infrastructure development. Their supply chain efficiency is tremendous. Their supply chain costs are only about 5% of the GDP. India spends about 14% of GDP on supply chain, primarily because our infrastructure is not good. China is urbanized, as MDP mentioned. We are still struggling at 34 to 40% urbanization. And then what China did is they took all these profits and surpluses that they're making from these rest of the industries, and they put it into the human capital and knowledge economy, because they realize that that's where it's going. Now they're neck to neck with the United States in so many frontier fields like AI, ML, quantum computing, cybersecurity, and so on. And so this is really something that India needs to study.
So folks, I want to conclude this episode today on a very positive, or should I say optimistic note, because God knows positive has its own connotations. So we know where we've been, we know where we are going, and we know that the government will move at its own pace, whether it's at the center level, whether it's at the state level, things will happen on their own pace, and we can't really change that. We have to move on with our lives, COVID, no COVID, traffic jam, no traffic jam, whatever it is. So, Mohandas, sir, I want to get this from you as someone who is also an investor who's seen so many entrepreneurs come up in the last 5-10 years and seen them succeed. And I want to throw that question to you, to Nisha, who has also, who spoke about AI, ML, and knows there are certain new areas where we are very good at. And finally, to Saurabh, Saurabh, you're seeing so much of change that's happening. I believe that in the last 6 months, when this pandemic was going on, interest in investing has gone up, whether it's through the trading route, investing route, HNI route, whatever. So from all three of you, I want your final thoughts that how can we, listeners of this episode, move forward with their lives and make things better for themselves? So,
well, I would say the biggest benefit of an expanded $3 trillion economy has been that the Indian entrepreneurs and the Indian mind has been liberated from constraint. We were born to constraints. Now we realize there are no constraints except which we bind ourselves. And like Saurabh said, with an expanded economy, and like Nisha said, with technology, there are limitless opportunities. And I think the new entrepreneurs, young people coming to the market are very, very aware of that. So they're very productive, they're very, very liberated, and the mind has no constraint. To me, that is the biggest plus. So we will grow to be a $6 trillion, $5 trillion economy by 2026. $10 trillion economy by 2031. Yes, government is doing its job, but the liberated Indian mind, the liberated Indian entrepreneurs are coming. Look at the startup industry, Anupam. 50,000 new startups have come up in the last 10 years. 5,000 come up every year. 1,000 get funded. In the last 6 years, we got, about 10,000 funded. $60 billion of capital has come in. And we got 40 unicorns. In the pandemic, we got 5 unicorns. And by 2025, we'll have 100 unicorns. They will create $500 billion of value, create 3.25 million jobs. And this explosion based upon the software service industry and what we have and everything else. And into every facet of industry, you're finding great companies come up who are breaking out and trying to become more global. Till the pandemic, people looked on the local market to grow. Now they're looking at the global market because the global GDP is about $83 trillion. Why be stuck in the $3 trillion? Look at $82 trillion. So I'm very, very optimistic. I'm very energetic. I'm very passionate about young entrepreneurs. I see change. I see innovation at the unprecedented level. Yes, there are some barriers about lack of productivity because of environment, etc. But they're all getting broken now. This optimism that I see in young people, the enormous energy, makes me work harder and harder and become much, much more optimistic.
Fantastic. Nisha, do you share the optimism?
Oh, definitely. I think, the pandemic, of course, had its toll on both lives and livelihood. But one of the biggest factors coming out of the pandemic is that technology works. We saw so many new technology paradigms becoming mainstream during the COVID crisis, right? Education technology, financial technologies, agri-technologies. And I think that gives me a lot of hope because it has shown us that we don't need to rely on good infrastructure necessarily. Of course, we need good infrastructure, but we don't have to rely on it. We don't have to rely on having to go to office every day because now we've understood the productivity that comes from work from home. We're doing this podcast, all of us are sitting in different places, but we're able to do such a productive podcast just because of the way technology is today. Mobile and internet penetration has skyrocketed in India over the last 5 years. And so all of this gives me a lot of hope that there is so much content out there. People have understood that they don't have to go to school or college necessarily to learn something. And so my optimism comes from the fact that I think India is going to start leapfrogging in many ways. Our studies have shown us, for example, that in Bihar and Jharkhand, the higher education infrastructure is very low. Gross enrollment rates are hardly 13, 14 in higher education. But the average Indian is consuming about 11 GB of data every month. And so that is going to change the way that Indians can access content, can access learning, and then start doing things on their own. Because the Indian ingenuity has never been in question. It's always been about constraints and low supply, right? And now supply is abundant. We know how to do new things. The pandemic has taught us that we have to start doing new things to survive and to grow. And that gives me a lot of optimism.
Fantastic. And on that very, very optimistic note, full of promise, that is a wrap on this episode of the Big Life Podcast. A very, very big thank you to Mohandas, Sir, to Nisha, and to Saurabh. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us today. Thank you.